Since time immemorial, humans have always strived for immortality. Despite massive advances in technology, healthcare, immortality remains a distant dream. Till that time, human beings are still mortal. So, in our Hindu mythology, King Hiranyakashipu, I think you would have mostly heard of it, prayed to Lord Brahma, got a boon that I cannot be killed by human or animal, neither in house or outside, in daylight or at night, or by weapon made by human or gods. So his imminent sense of immortality is echoed in today's world by the new age serums, injections, medicines, blood transfusions, something that we think will make us immortal. But the fact is, despite all this, we know that something is going to affect us. And by these therapies, we hope not to die by cancers, heart diseases, kidney, or liver diseases. But the fact is, Lord Vishnu, incarnated in his Narsimha avatar, actually slayed King Hiranyakashipu at twilight in the courtyard with his claws while holding him on his thighs. Unfortunately, as mere mortals, we humans are also worn down by diseases which reduce our lifespan and decrease the quality of life. So as doctors, we talk about disease survival in 5-year mortality rates. So basically what we are looking at is, what are the chances of you dying of a disease in the coming 5 years? And for doctors, this is very important because every disease has a 5-year mortality rate. So if you were, what are the chances of you surviving next 5 years if you were diagnosed with any one of these diseases? If I ask you, which group of diseases have the maximum 5-year mortality rate? I think the commonest answer would be, it is cancer. And you're right. 6 out of top 10 are actually cancers. But if I again ask you, what about the other 4 out of the 10 non-cancer diseases? The probable first answer would be heart, but it's not the correct answer. To tell you the truth, it is actually the top 4 of the other 10 are actually have very high mortality rate, are related to your legs and foot ulcers. Yes, it's difficult to believe that the foot conditions that we relate to as simple and common in the society are literally killing us much faster than any other disease. Peripheral arterial disease, ischemic ulcers, amputation, neuropathic ulcers have very common risk factors. Advancing age, smoking, obesity, high cholesterol levels, but the most common factor is actually diabetes. Now, peripheral arterial disease is something like blockage of the arteries for the legs, the brain, and the arms. It sounds very similar to heart attack, but basically if you have stroke or paralysis, it is called a brain attack. And if you have something like gangrene or non-healing ulcers, then it is leg attack. Unfortunately, India has become the diabetic capital of the world. Can imagine that we have the largest number of diabetic patients. Nearly 1 in 7 diabetic is now in India. So we are heading, as a nation, we are heading towards a diabetic epidemic. To put it in numbers, according to the Diabetic Federation, International Diabetic Federation 2024 data, India has an estimated 9 crore diabetic patients in the 20 to 79 age group. If you talk about, this is a smaller age group, so people who are younger or older are still not counted, so 9 crore people today. Now this number is going to increase to close to more than 15 crores in 2050 in India alone. So you can imagine at that time, 13% of our population will be diabetic. It's again estimated that around 43% of the patients are still undiagnosed. So practically 40 to 45% of our patients today, despite being diabetic, are neither on any medicines and not even diagnosed to be diabetics. So we all know that diabetes harms our body in a multitude of ways. First is by increasing sugar levels, you have more infections. Other is by increasing atherosclerosis, cholesterol deposition, you have more arteries, the less flows in the arteries. Because of that, you get painful leg ulcers, you have gangrene, which is basically blackening of the toes, or you can't walk. Diabetes also causes damage to the nerves, which will cause numbness of the feet. Now, numbness of the feet per se may not look so ominous, but the fact is, because you start losing balance, you start falling more, you have an increased risk of ulcers, you have pressure sores, you have shoe bites. So statistics reveal a very startling and ominous rule of 15. And this is related to diabetic ulcers. So 15% of all diabetic patients at some stage in their lifetime will develop an ulcer. Now, 15% is a huge number if you're looking at 9 crore people. So 1 in 6 diabetic will develop an ulcer in the feet. To give you a perspective, an ulcer is a small cut in the feet and toes, usually because of the shoe bite, is it a friction rub, or it's while cutting your nails. Looks very simple if you look at it. But the fact is, the second part of the rule says 15% of these small innocuous ulcers will go on to have major amputations or major infections or bone infections. Now, correlate this to the estimated number of diabetic patients in India. So you have around 1.5 crore patients who will get a diabetic ulcer. Now, if you look at these numbers, this is practically 10 times more than all the cancer patients that were diagnosed in India in 2022. So looking at a figure of number of patients who are so huge and will be having such morbid life. And this is fortunately all preventable. Now, all these factors, either alone or in combination, make a person more prone for amputation. Usually it is a below or an above knee amputation. So as per statistics, there's a non-traumatic amputation, so which is not related to your accidents or falls or some kind of industrial accidents. A non-traumatic amputation happening every 20 seconds across the world. So in my talk of 10 minutes, around 30 diabetics around the world would have lost their legs. There's another ominous rule of 50 for diabetic amputation. So rule of 50 states that 50% of the patients who get amputation in one leg will probably get another major amputation in the other leg within 5 years. Now, second part of the rule is something I talked about earlier. 50% of these patients who get a major amputation in one leg will not be alive 5 years later. So you can imagine that every 7 seconds, somewhere in the world, someone is dying of diabetes and its complications. Now, that's a number which is mind-boggling, and we are still not talking about it. So, Achilles. So, everybody has heard of Achilles heel. So, in Greek mythology, one of the tales of immortality actually starts with Achilles. As a kid, he was skinny-dipped by his mother, Thetis, in the river Styx while holding his right ankle. So, his right ankle and the heel were not touched by the holy waters. So they were the only weak and vulnerable part of his body. So we have all heard of Trojan Wars or the Troy. At the end of those famous Trojan War, the Trojan horse, the Trojan War, despite being one of the greatest and invincible Greek warrior, he was killed by an arrow shot through his right heel. And hence came the phrase, the Achilles heel. So lesson learned, always protect your feet. Let's not discuss about the economic aspects of these diseases for the society. Now, most of my patients in India are in their 40s, 50s, and early 60s. Now, that's the ripe age when you have the whole family is earning, everybody is in their jobs. But whereas when I was working in UK, most of my patients were in late 70s or 80s. So now you can imagine the physical, economic, the psychological loss that we as a society have to undertake. Because the main earning member of the family loses his leg, his livelihood, at his peak productivity period. At an average, US spends around $176 billion in diabetic care in a year. Around 1/3 of it, close to $60 billion are spent just on foot problems in diabetics. So in 2017, the world spent around $850 billion on diabetic care. Now look at that huge number. Out of this, only 12 billion was spent in our area, our subcontinent, the Southeast Asia region. So we are spending just 1% of the total diabetic cost or the cost of world-related diabetes treatment, despite being home to more than 18% of all diabetic population. So you can imagine that despite having a huge number of diabetic patients, we are just not spending enough money or resources on our patients. This is a huge loss to the society and a nation. Yet, we're not talking about it. Why are we not talking about it? So what should we do? I think the first point is let's start talking about it. It is something which affects us all. It affects our family members. It affects our friends. Let's start talking about it. We need to know that all these diseases are potentially treatable, are potentially preventable. We need to start talking about how do we reduce the risks, diet control, stress management, obesity, stop smoking, tobacco chewing. Need to get ourselves tested for it. We have to stop, I think, understanding that we need to do something about this, which is there and we don't know about it. So walking is the single best exercise. Start walking. 8,000 steps is preferable, but 10,000 is ideal. It's a single best exercise for all age groups, which will decrease the incidence of all lifestyle diseases or non-communicable diseases, as we doctors call them. Do consult a physician or a cardiologist if you're starting to walk after a long time or have some chest of heart issues. But the fact is, along with walking, also start doing some weight training or yoga. It should be done besides all these. Exercise is mostly cardiovascular, but it's yoga and the weight training which will build up your muscles. Building up your muscles will prevent falls, will improve your balance. And this is something which a diabetic patient or older age group start doing. Older people start falling, they start hurting themselves, fracture hips, fracture bones. All these things will all eventually help in helping your patients. Now, one more thing important is start realizing that we have to do something about it. Start inspecting your feet. So first thing first is make an conscious effort to check your diabetic family members' feet, friends, and making sure you do it every day. There are 7 golden rules of diabetic foot care to be remembered. 1, do not walk bare feet. Now, this is something which is inherent to Indians. We like to walk bare feet in our houses, but for a diabetic patients, please do not do it. Your feet sensation go down, so you have insensate feet. So even if there's a pin or a sharp glass, for that matter, even a Lego piece in where they have kids will get stuck, you won't feel it, and you'll keep walking on it and start developing an ulcer there. Always wear broad-tipped shoes, so that in a typical those pointed shoes which are in vogue, stop wearing those, especially for diabetic patients. So they need to be wider, they need to be, I think, broader at the tip, where the toe box is. Always wear shoes which are slightly half a size bigger. I would say half a size bigger is something that we advocate, and preferably wear shoes, buy shoes in the evening. And that's a very question everybody asks, why evening? Because diabetic patients usually have some swelling in the legs. So if you measure the shoes in the morning, by the time it's evening, the shoe is already tight. And diabetic patients should never wear tight shoes. So the shoes should be comfortable fit, definitely not tight, but should also not slip out while walking. So invest in a good pair of shoes. And as the saying goes, good shoes take you to good places. Now avoid temperature extremes. Not too cold, neither too hot. In winter especially, do not use hot water bottles or heaters for warming the feet. The typical Indian is usually we put our feet next to coal or a heating pad or next to heaters. For a diabetic patient, it's an absolute killer. Every year, I see minimum 30 patients who have come back with burnt feet or with heat blisters in their feet. Avoid dry, flaky skin, which may cause scratches or subsequent ulcers. So basically, you want to keep your feet as soft as possible. But when you go onto your web spaces, keep them dry. So good powder on your web spaces, but keep your feet generally well oiled, well soft. Cut nails properly. And I think this is something which is a revelation. So always leave that 1 millimeter nail bed, which is there at the end of cutting nails, and especially true in diabetic patients. We've been cutting nails since we were kids. Forget about kids, when we were infants. So our parents have started cutting nails then, and we started enjoying cutting our nails when we were 9 or 10. And we've been doing it since then. But the fact is, as you grow older, you can't see well. You cut it by feeling. Because if you're too deep, You withdraw the nail cutter and then cut it. But because you're a diabetic, you don't feel it, and you cut deeper. And they start getting ulcers there, and which go on to amputations at some stage. So always leave that 1 millimeter mark. Visit a doctor to get your feet checked every 6 months. Now, as per Greek mythology, Hephaestus is the god of metal and blacksmith. He was mocked by other gods for his weak and twisted feet. And yet, from the same forge, he made the beautiful weapons of strength and vitality. So it's a lesson to be learned. With proper care, support, rehabilitation, every patient with diabetic foot problems can be cured and go on to lead normal lives. Every single leg is important, and we should all come together to prevent and save these needless amputations. We all need to work together to make India an amputation-free India. Every little step matters, both literally and figuratively. Happy feet leads to happy family, leads to a happy nation. Thank you very much.